This is really pretty phenomenal real estate. Super cool space, very high on vibes.
It does give you some pricing power just given the location.
Why would someone not want to live here? It's a iconic architectural style that you don't see often anywhere else.
What's up, guy? And welcome to the Real Estate Anonymous podcast. You got Fitzy, Sully, and Murph checking in from South Boston. We got an unreal deal on Newbury Street. It's street retail, it's residential, it's dirty water dough and sushis and whatever the hell else you want to get into. You should check it out. The episode is wicked pissa. All right, welcome in Real Estate Anonymous podcast. Eric Weatherholtz, Brett Moss. I'm Elliot White. We got a good one today. First, we're going to find out. Looks like Brett is captive in some kind of dingy hotel room.
You are correct, sir. You are correct.
Where are you?
I am here on my free will, not being held against my will. Raleigh was hosted down at Pinehurst for the final practice round of the U.S. Open yesterday, in between a couple girls lacrosse tournaments in Baltimore and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I've been in a hotel room for like a week with 4 more nights to go.
Jesus. So a little mix of work and screwing around and being a good father?
Yes. It's just trying to, justify my existence.
Got it. Are your kids happy you're around, or are you just like loosely available to buy dinner when they ask?
No, I'm around. I go. And what's funny is my daughter didn't realize that she wasn't staying with me the whole time. So they were staying in maybe less desirable accommodations for the first weekend. And she's like, Dad, this place is terrible. And I said, it'll be good for you over the next 10 days.
Yep. It'll build character.
It builds character. Yeah, it's also normal.
Exactly.
It's also normal.
Eric, what's up with you? What's new in your world? I know we talked a little bit about a project you're working on, but that's probably a little too early to talk about. But you got anything of substance you want to get into?
Well, highlight of my day yesterday, I went, was at a brewery. The highlight part of it was they've got sort of this outdoor patio area, and see a few people, and there's a food truck that is pulled up to the patio, and, which is not, some crazy thing, but sticking his head out of the service window is a guy named Todd Ginsburg, who's one of the great chefs in the Southeast. And I said, what in the hell are you doing here? And so he had, for sport, he had his probably 10-year-old kid in there with him, and they'd opened up this. He decided for fun and sport that he would do a food truck, park it at this brewery, and do riffs on fast food. He tried to put up a menu that would be supportive of beer drinking, and so it had like his, Take a McDonald's filet of fish and make it the best thing that you ever had. Do a Taco Bell Crunchwrap Supreme and have it prepared by a James Beard guy. So anyway, that was great fun seeing him, and to see somebody that's, we rarely get the chance to see somebody that's so passionate about what they're doing, that the sport of creating this simple, wonderful food was, enough to have him set aside his whole life, and to be able to do that with his little kid, and to make this outdoor patio of a brewery bring this thing to life like it'd never been. Super cool.
That's great. I love when you stumble upon places like that.
Well, I would say that I did have a Crunchwrap Supreme earlier this week, and it was not made by a James Beard award-winning chef. But it was damn good, man.
I don't know if I'd admit that, Brett.
Well, I just did to the masses. But I did wake up the next morning.
Any good broker's got to do some windshield time, and a side full of Taco Bell is supportive of that activity. I'm with you, brother.
Yep. I fondly remember days as a broker driving all over Hell's Half Acre, and you're just eating in these weird-ass convenience stores. You're getting a protein bar and maybe some kind of ready-made sandwich that looks edible, and you're back on the road.
That's right. That's exactly right.
We had a big week here at work last week, a project we've been working on for quite some time. We finally got awarded. We're purchasing it off of a government entity, so there's a lot of complexity there and city council meetings.
Hey,
And,
ring the bell.
yeah, well, it's
we need
Yeah,
a
man.
deal. Need a deal bell on Real Estate Anonymous.
we do need it.
Yeah, we do. We do.
So we have the signed PSA. We are now in the closing process. It's all very, very exciting. It's been a ton of work. It's a nice validation to buy something really significant off of a government entity, and they look at you and think, you seem like a reasonable operator, so we will give you this deal.
Little do they know.
Little do they know, I'm just a madman. One of the things that we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, the affordable housing business, there's all these second and third bites of the apple. There are these weird legislative changes that happen in different markets across the country, both at the federal, the state, and sometimes even the local level. There'd be some little new piece of legislation that gets passed, and we pay close attention to that stuff, and we move on it pretty quickly. I like to think we move on it pretty quickly. And that process means you're often figuring it out in real time with whatever legislative body is passing the legislation or has passed it. And so the process of finding deals, we're looking at a new market, and you're just first trying to see what's out there. What could we buy? Of all of the multifamily properties that are in the known universe in the submarket, what can we buy? And at the same time that you're running traps and all the things that may be for sale, you're also working with the government to say, or this nonprofit, whatever the legislation happens to look like, does this fit? So it's a lot of like you're on a fishing expedition, but you honestly don't even know what you're fishing for. You're just trying to catch whatever's out there, and you're pulling onto the boat. You're going, all right, does this work? If not, we can throw it back. That's what it takes at the beginning when you're trying to figure out these programs. You can make some good money. You can have a lot of fun. You can be involved in designing some of the oversight and the legislative process by which these deals are kind of put together. So it's super interesting to me. I don't expect it's going to be very interesting to many people, but we got a new market in mind, and we're kind of going crazy trying to dig some stuff up. So as that progresses, we'll keep you posted. It's been a fun week, though.
I'm a huge fan. We've got right now 4 public-private partnerships that are ongoing, and I like it because there's some really innovative financing techniques that that municipalities have that the private sector can't even get close to. And it's once you can get open to that world, you can do good things, but you can also do it for not just fun but profit as well. So it's when those worlds align, it's a really fantastic thing.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm always quick to, whenever we have resident meetings where we talk to people, I always point out that what we do for a profit, especially in the affordable housing world. Tenants have a pretty good bullshit detector. And so if you just show up in your $5,000 suit and you're talking about, it's part of the mission and we're this and we're that, that's all. Nobody believes a fucking altruist. They just don't. So as long as you're sort of candid about, we this is our business. This is how we, our families live our lives. And yes, we do this and we make money doing it, but it doesn't really need to come at your expense. We renovate the buildings and we preserve good housing stock and we're good public-private partners. I find that leading with that people tend to take you more seriously.
I'm Elliot. This is my hustle. Now tell me yours.
Yeah, right.
Tell me more.
Right. But if you sort of pretend like you don't make money, people go, of course you make money, knock it off. Don't lie to me. Anyway, we got a fun one here today. It's in my own backyard. I know we've done Boston. This will now be the second time, but this is really pretty phenomenal real estate. There's a street in Boston. We're going to go ahead and find this and pull it up. But there's a street in Boston that is a well-known shopping, walking around, whatever you want to call it. It's called Newbury Street. And Newbury Street is, honestly, it's the spot. I mean, I think people who even aren't from Boston know Newbury Street. So for those who don't, Newbury Street is this kind of main thoroughfare and it goes from very expensive to very weird, which is fantastic. On the very expensive side, right up near the Boston Common, which is sort of, akin to New York Central Park, it's this big central green space. Newbury Street runs right into that. And on the corner of Newbury and Arlington Street, you've got Burberry and Cartier and Chanel and Valentino, all of these very expensive stores. Then at the very, very far end of Newbury Street, you've got Newbury Comics, which is a very weird place. You've got Condom World. You've got, Billy's Beef Jerky Emporium. And that whole street, it just runs from very pricey to very strange. And you get these really eclectic retailers. It's a ton of fun. You can see sort of an overview of Newbury Street here it's in the part of Boston called the Back Bay. Beautiful old historic brownstones. Tends to be 2 floors of retail. It's kind of a split garden level entrance. You might have basement retail and then kind of an elevated first floor retail. And then you've got typically 2 or 3 levels of residential. Super cool space, very high on vibes. And we'll kind of get into what's going on here.
There's a handful of places in the world that if you, were blindfolded, put down on a street, you'd know where you were. Santa Barbara has some of that. Michigan Avenue has that. Fifth Avenue has that. Newbury Street is one of those places with that really unique. Can't think of another place that you see this sort of unique organization of space where it's a split level of 2-story retail, one slightly below grade, one slightly above grade, and then residential above that, and these what are brownstone buildings with a few steps leading up. It's a iconic architectural style that you don't see often anywhere else.
Yeah, it's super cool. We've got a picture of it here up on the screen, but if you're listening, this is a photo looking up Newbury Street towards the Boston Common, the Public Garden. To the left, you've got some nicer homes on Commonwealth Avenue, Marlborough Street, Beacon Street, and then the Charles River. Straight ahead, you've got the financial district, and then on the left, you've got some more kind of office and hotel in the Back Bay. It's got 100, a walk score is 100 out of 100. You can live your entire life here with no car. Everything you need is in walking distance. Phenomenal restaurants, great retail, employment, the subway. There's a number of different stops that are really close to Newbury Street. I was fortunate enough earlier in my career, I worked for a company that had an office on Newbury Street, and parking down there was a real hassle, but we had parking. Getting in and out of the city was a challenge, but it's a pretty neat place to walk around. And when the weather's nice, you've got all these little restaurants, and they're not big. It's not a massive patio. It's not like when you think of Del Frisco's and they have 40 tables out on this patio because it was all custom built for them. Everything is a small, older brownstone. So these patios might be 4 or 5 tables. And it's a really cool place. You can sort of duck away, have a bottle of wine, have an appetizer, whatever you want after work. It's a really, really neat spot. And so what's being sold here, and I won't bury the lead. I said at the beginning, I'm a buyer. I like this location. I mean, we got to figure out what the price is, right?
I'm a buyer. Tell me the price later.
Tell me where to send the check.
Here's a check. You put the numbers in, and I will see you at the closing. It is, I mean, you've got to be negative leverage going in. It's going to be very pricey. It's 6 contiguous buildings, which I cannot recall in my real estate career anytime 6 contiguous buildings in Newbury Street came up for sale. 6 contiguous buildings, 40 units. So you've got some residential units, you've got some retail. It's a pretty remarkable thing to be coming on the market.
So it looks like these buildings were built in the late 1800s. Very organic, I would say, in the way this is played out.
And a weird bit about Boston, and especially the Back Bay, this used to be a swamp. So the Back Bay, this whole area is man-made over time, and they brought in fill from all other parts of the state and filled in this area.
Huh.
And so,
always wondered.
Yeah, and so most of these buildings have these wooden piers that run, way, way down. But it's pretty neat. It's a really, really cool area. The Back Bay begins right at the foot of Beacon Hill, and Beacon Hill is a very beautiful old residential part of the city, but just a super cool spot.
So you always talk about there's got to be, why would someone want to live here? I think those boxes are checked here. Invert it and say, why would someone not want to live here?
Yeah, so most of these, there's some info we can and can't share. right? Because I had to sign a confidentiality agreement to get the financials. But I can give you kind of broad info. So most of the residential here, certainly in these 6 buildings, they're 1 bedroom, 1 bath. It's a couple of studios, but the 1 beds are going to rent somewhere between $2,500 and $3,500 a month. And the 1 beds are small; they're 400 square feet. So it's tight. It is downtown city living at its finest. Your retail spaces are probably 1,500 to 1,800 square feet each. But challenge and why people wouldn't want to live here is at some point your life just exceeds a 1 bedroom, a 400 square foot 1 bedroom. So this is great for post-grad, young professional, living in Boston, working nearby. It's the kind of space where you'd probably live here for 3-4 years. You have a phenomenal time, and then your life changes where you think, okay, I'd like a little more space. I'd like a yard. I'd like this, or I have a significant other with me.
And if you've got a car, you're probably parking it at your office, or you're renting a garage space somewhere else. Yeah. I think the other thing that is what you talked about a little bit is the scale of it adds a lot more interest. So Newbury, like any shopping street, any high street, comes in blocks, and you've got each block kind of ends up having its own retail personality. So you've got the Chanel end, and then you've got the middle market stuff, the Lululemon end, and then there's the services end where you might have salons and fitness and that sort of thing. I think with having how many, it has like 13 retail spaces.
Yeah, let me see here.
Yeah, 13 retail suites. That's right, Eric. And then six parking spots, which maybe are kind of those teaser spots, which I think you mentioned a couple of weeks ago on one of these podcasts.
So it has, which is important in that with 13 spaces, and this block is not the luxury end. The rents, on Newbury, I think you could see some of the high end rents, maybe $400 a foot, something like that. And at the low end on the same street, just a few blocks away, they might be, 80 to 100. So what a huge variance in a few steps, one way or the other, as to what the rents might be. But I think what's unique here is having this number of spaces. You have a big say over what happens on a block. And so you could start to turn the tide to whatever direction that you wanted. For example, this isn't the right answer, but if you were going to do all jewelry and accessories became this block, and you went out, you could start to influence it. Or if this was all bars, you could start to influence it in a different direction. And by coming up with a cohesive retail, we'll call it merchandising plan of deciding which stores you're going to put in which places, you could really have a big influence on the value of a entire block, and then the residential would benefit from that. So if you think about what tenants you would want to drive residential rents, might be something different than the types of tenants that you wanted to drive, the retail stuff. So if you wanted the highest end retail rents, you might want all jewelry and accessories and that sort of thing. Luxury, to the extent you could draw them up there. If you wanted to create the most desirable residential area, you might focus more on food and beverage. But I think it's unique that you have both of those, the ability to amenitize your project with who you select to go into these retail spaces.
And I don't know if we have it, but it looks like, part of the offering from the website and the investment highlights is renewing current tenants in place, which you would find probably to be a high probability here, given how special this location is. But yeah, I think over the long term, Eric, that's a good point, kind of a cohesive thought process around users here to kind of make it even a bigger draw than it already is.
That's the interesting thing about it being 6 buildings that are all contiguous. is one building or maybe two, if they're not located next to one another, your buyer is going to think about, okay, this is going to be good, really stable cash flow. I might not love the yield going in, but I'm going to love the real estate forever. So fine.
Right.
With the 6 contiguous buildings, you may have a slightly different buyer who thinks, to Eric's point, which is well made, I have an interesting opportunity to shape this part of town a little bit, right? That's enough scale where you might get a larger player to come in and say, hey, we can kind of reimagine this retail front and have that ripple out over the rest of the block.
I think these types of properties, so high street retail kind of, came into, it was the darling of real estate investing, probably mid 2010s, early 2010s. Prices went kind of nuts on places like, Oak Street in Chicago, Fifth Avenue, and then a lot of institutional money moved into that world. And then as we got to COVID, I think what people realized, the downside of that is that rents don't always go up, but the other thing is it's hard to do at scale. So it's difficult to put together a lot of property. So people kind of ended up with these disparate assets, where you could have only one building in a market because they didn't trade that often. But then the bigger issue from the retail standpoint is you ended up buying these condos, ground floor condos, and you could be very negatively influenced by what the person next to you did. Not that it happened, but if you owned the Chanel building and the Cartier next to you, in a ridiculous example, got swapped out for a vape shop, the value of your building through nothing that you did could get kicked in the groin. So I think those sorts of things kind of combined to create that took a lot of the desirability out of high street as an asset class. But the reality of it is these are properties that have been around for, in this case, a couple of 100 years. They're very lindy. They're going to be terrific stuff for the rest of our lifetimes and many more after that would be my bet. And having the ability to put together a group of them, fantastic. And then I think most importantly, though, is having them at this point in the cycle at a higher rate environment probably brings the price per square foot down to what I would bet would be one of the most attractive entry points in the last 20 years, I'm guessing, of where this thing sells.
And just poking around some of the online third-party websites, it looks like rents are $80 to $140 a square foot. Does that sound about right?
I've got some financials here. You're really seeing a range, but that's right. I mean, you're looking at what's the lowest I see is maybe 84. It's kind of the lowest, and then going up to about 125-ish. What's really interesting too, this Newbury Street is such an important kind of part of Boston that the city has started, and they'll do it again this year, from June until September. So kind of during the high season, they are closing Newbury Street and the connecting streets. They shut them off so there's no vehicle traffic on Sundays. And I think they're going to start doing this more. There's been a real push to make Newbury Street just a walking street and turn expand the patios, expand the amenities. But they do that and they shut down the street and people are all out walking around and they move tables out into the streets. And it's really, I don't know. It's hard to see. You've got to be careful about the price you pay. I think it's going to be expensive going in, but it's very hard to see a scenario where you buy this and then 10 years from now you think, I never should have bought that. Right.
Right.
That damn Newbury Street.
Yeah.
What, Elliot? It looks like a beautiful day out. Just looking out your window there, I'm wondering if this picture was shot earlier today.
This is
You have a beautiful day in the picture, a beautiful day what I can see over your
this is the
shoulder there.
time of year to be in New England. It's about 75 to 80 degrees and sunny. You get a nice little breeze, and then at nighttime it cools down to maybe the low 60s. And so you can open your windows while you sleep, get a little breeze coming in. It's pretty good.
So the things that one wouldn't like about this, you gotta dig pretty hard to find the things not to like. I think in these kind of properties, the things not to like always ends up the primary one is the price. But the other negatives might be
Yeah.
capex. We don't
Yep.
know about keeping up these old buildings.
Yep. I was just going to say that.
It is a what are they, 3-story walk-ups? I probably don't have any elevators anywhere, good or
Yeah,
bad.
it goes up to 4. It looks like on some of these suites, but yeah, that's spot on.
One of the buildings I was in had an elevator. I haven't seen that. That's not really typically the norm here, but our old office had an elevator.
I don't know about the taxing environment or the insurance environment there. Are there things that could move against you, at least on the? Let's talk more about the residential. I think the retail, hit the big topics. But what is there that would be challenges other than small size on the residential spaces?
I think you are more than most locations in the city. I think you're insulated from a lot of the price fluctuation in apartment buildings that are even 3 blocks away. Because I think that people are within a certain range, right? But people are choosing to live on Newbury Street because they very much want to live on Newbury Street. They are choosing this over a Class A building. You could probably get a decent Class A building a couple blocks away for about the same rent. Feels a little bit like the demand is sort of inelastic here, and you're not as exposed to the broader rental market fluctuation. But if you were to really see a significant housing downturn, there's not a ton of supply in Boston. It's just very hard to build. But if you were in some kind of recessionary environment and rents went down in a lot of the competing properties, you're only a block or two away from the Ritz-Carlton residences, the Mandarin Oriental residences, a number of very high-end St. Regis. There's a number of spots very close by that you could choose to live in. And so if you saw really broad rental pressure, maybe you'd see a little bit of a decline in your rent, or you'd see rents hold flat for a little bit. The only reason I guess that's concerning is the price you're going to have to pay to buy this. You really need most of this to continue at least on the path that it's been on for a while. There's not a whole lot of, I don't imagine, cushion built in for rents to go down. I don't see that happening on Newbury Street because people are very much making a choice to live on this block, but it's a possibility.
When you're only dealing with 24 residential units to begin with, which is a much more manageable number than a conventional
Yeah.
multi-housing deal of 250 to 300, right? So it does give you some pricing power just given the location, and you're only dealing with 24 units.
I think from a investment standpoint, there's benefit to having all this stuff together. I think a negative to that is the pool of owners interested in retail combined with residential, or vice versa. Residential that happens to have this retail becomes a subset that's smaller than the overall. I think
Right.
here you've got two really different businesses in owning and operating residential space, A, and then B, owning and operating retail space. There, clearly people do it, but it's a smaller number of folks. So the buyer pool, when you wanted to sell, is smaller than might be if it was just one or the other. But that's the case for all this Newbury Street stuff, and hasn't proved to be a shortage of buyers for these kind of properties. I don't think you'd want to do it, but I also do like things like this where were you to want to sell, being able to sell these individually might present a premium opportunity because you could argue it both ways. There's value to having this all as one chunk to a larger buyer, maybe more institutional, or there's maybe a premium to depending on market conditions at the time, to bust it up and sell them individually in more bite-sized chunks to individual type investors.
A wise man I know once said all business is either bundling or unbundling.
Bundling or unbundling. Sometimes taking away actually improves things.
So
that's right.
Unbundling.
This is aerial view of where you are in Boston. You're very close to the Charles River. What's always fun about looking on Google Earth is as you start to zoom in, you wonder what else, like what are the businesses? And immediately you get close enough. Every square inch is covered with a business or a restaurant or a bar or a salon. Or, it's a pretty neat spot. Yeah.
So really is an iconic part of America. Then it comes down to, pricing that's, what is an investor's alternative? Here you can get a lot more conviction around the lack of downside from a rental demand standpoint in a location like this. It becomes more, okay, if I have X dollars, is this the best home for them? And it's a pretty sultry home, I'll tell you
it's
that
not bad.
much.
I'll be curious to see how this prices. I don't think we are a buyer. This doesn't really fit what we do, but set aside the fact that it may be a mismatch for what my company does. There's no question in my mind that I would understand why people would want to own this.
And you guys tell me, but what does this trade for on like a cap rate basis? Just kind of high level. Is this like a 7 to 8?
If you could buy this for a 7 to 8 cap, I'd buy it. I think Eric and I would find the money today. My guess is this is going to trade probably somewhere between a 4 and a 4.5. I think you're going to take on a decent amount of negative leverage for a while,
with the potential to have capital outlays from a re-tenanting perspective, from additional TI dollars to leasing commissions. So basis going up is probably a good base case, in the near
I think
term.
that's right. And what you're left with is a very steady coupon in maybe the most desirable retail and residential corridor in the city. I think there's a lot of people who think, I'm going to buy this. I would bet you the buyer for this doesn't sell it again for 25 or 30 years. I think it.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
They're just going to buy it. They're going to hold their nose at the entry. And 10, 15 years from now, they're going to look like a genius and they'll sit on it. It'll kick off generational wealth for the family. And then at some point, there's another big sale. But this feels like someone's going to buy it and hold it for a very long time.
There's a handful of buyers, I know a couple of them in the world, families that seek out this type of property, high street American retail, and do exactly that: buy it, put the deed in a drawer, and don't talk about it for a couple of generations. That could be a buyer here. I think another buyer could be a local sharpshooter who sees a retail story here, because you can see that, because there is such a variance in retail rents just a few blocks away. If you could take, whatever X NOI is at a 4 or 5 cap and take, I don't know how it's split up, but I bet half of the income off of this is coming off the retail space, which is only a quarter of the total square footage or something.
Yep.
And so if you could take the number on the retail space, which makes up half of the total, and meaningfully increase that by doing what we were talking about earlier of a change of merchandising and a change of tenancy, and say I can take these, $80 to $100 rents, and by bringing in a different tenancy type, take them to $100 or $200, you've totally changed the return profile of that. So I think if there was somebody that was close enough to it, that was a Boston retail warlord that saw that opportunity, that could also be a buyer. And then maybe there's some local institutional types that there's a lot of dough in Boston, and people that are in the investment business a few blocks away and saw this and said, I get it, I want to own it, I'm down.
About 4 blocks up is one of the coolest retail buildings in the city, and it used to be, I think it was the Boston Public Library for a long time, and they put the public library down over here. After it was a public library, it's this. So it's on the corner of Newbury and Berkeley. And in Boston, when you're on any one of these streets in the Back Bay, the streets go down in alphabetical order. So you have Arlington, Berkeley, Clarendon, Dartmouth. So you sort of know where you are depending on what letter your street starts with. But on the corner of Berkeley and Newbury Street is what used to be a museum. Maybe it was the old Museum of Fine Arts. But Restoration Hardware has purchased this building. It's this unbelievable freestanding retail. They own and fill all 3 floors. Unbelievable. Before Restoration Hardware was in here, was a clothing company called Louis, and they had a little restaurant, Louis Boston, around the corner. But this is a pretty remarkable thing. If you're in Boston and you wanted to check this out when you're walking around Newbury Street, highly recommend it. Beautiful building.
Another cool one is you get down to the end of Newbury, it turns into, I guess, Massachusetts Avenue, and a block or so off of that is this shop called Bodega.
I know Bodega well.
You go in, and it's a it's a little gritty convenience store type scene, except it's all fake. And a door opens.
Yeah, this is the front of Bodega. Yeah.
Yeah, so you see just the typical corner lottery ticket and smokes store, and go inside, and there's a it's like
super high end sneaker store.
Yeah, you go past a vending machine into this other room, and it's like walking into a Tiffany store, except instead of diamonds, it's Air Jordans. It's fantastic.
It's a super cool place. Yeah, the guy behind it's like a fake convenience store, and you walk in, and the guy has to pull some lever, and a vending machine opens up, and you walk around through the back of the vending machine, and now you're inside this.
Okay, so who is Brett? Are you a buyer? Or are you gonna stick to a rental townhouse in Central Florida?
Well, or just you pick the place. I see what you're doing there, Eric. I agree with the comment made that this is kind of a generational, it was a core location, irreplaceable, however we want to define that. And I'm making bets on that long term. This does feel like a buyer that really understands, probably a local buyer, if I had to guess here. And so I don't think that a 4 to 5 cap is something that would get me super excited here. But the real estate speaks for itself, and I think that in and of itself would be intriguing to Elliot and your point, the points made earlier in the podcast. But give me a rental townhome, and you pick the place in the middle of nowhere, and I probably understand that a little bit more. Yeah. But I think this is a ridiculously cool location and irreplaceable, which locations matter again, as I say a lot on this podcast now.
I think on this, I'm probably a buyer down to a 4.5 cap, and I don't even know if that wins it.
Yeah.
Eric?
Well, what about you, Eric? Yeah.
How you think? Oh, I'm right there. I'm right there with Elliot. That's a winner.
It's a cool one.
Yeah. Really cool deal.
I think that's it, gents, unless you got something else.
All right. Good one. Enjoyed it as always, guys.
I like it.
All right.